The Discovery. Captain Daniel Hayes leaned back in the pilot's seat of his small scout ship, the Venture, as it drifted silently through the void of uncharted space. The mission was supposed to be routine. Chart empty star systems, log any anomalies, and move on. But hours of scanning lifeless rocks and empty blackness had left him bored and restless. He glanced at the screen again, hoping for something, anything, to break the monotony. That's when the sensor alarm blared. Daniel sat up straight, his fingers flying over the console. The screen displayed a faint but massive reading. Something large, metallic, and stationary, just outside the mapped region of space. It wasn't a planet or asteroid, and it definitely wasn't natural. His heart quickened. Whatever it was, it didn't belong there. "Computer, enhance the scan," he commanded, his voice steady despite his excitement. The screen flickered as the ship's AI processed the data. Slowly, an image began to form, a cluster of ships. No, not just ships, a fleet. Hundreds of them, massive and intricately designed, floating silently in the dark. "What in the world?" Daniel whispered, his breath catching in his throat. These weren't human ships. Their angular shapes and alien markings glowed faintly under the dim light of a distant star. The fleet looked ancient, as if it had been drifting for centuries, untouched and forgotten. Curiosity and caution wrestled in his mind. Protocol dictated he report the find and wait for backup, but he was alone, weeks away from the nearest human outpost. If he didn't investigate, someone else might, and they'd get the credit. And besides, who could resist the allure of an untouched alien fleet? Strapping himself into his seat, Daniel guided the Venture closer to the fleet. As he approached, the scale of the ships became clear. The largest vessel, positioned at the center of the formation, dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. Its hull was scared, evidence of battles long past, yet it retained a sense of power and majesty. Daniel brought the Venture alongside the flagship and donned his spacesuit. With a deep breath, he stepped into the airlock, grabbing a portable scanner and flashlight. The hatch hissed open, and he floated into the flagship's docking bay. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of his suit's life support. The interior was dark, but the flashlight's beam revealed intricate carvings on the walls, telling stories of battles and triumphs. The symbols were unlike anything he'd seen, but something about them felt strangely familiar, as if they were a forgotten piece of human history. He moved cautiously through the corridors, his scanner detecting faint power readings deep within the ship. The air was stale but breathable, a testament to the advanced technology keeping the vessel intact after all this time. Eventually, Daniel reached a massive chamber at the heart of the ship. The walls were lined with consoles, their screens dark. In the center of the room stood a pedestal with a glowing crystal. As he approached, the pedestal lit up, and a hologram flickered to life. The figure in the hologram wasn't human, but it looked eerily similar. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its voice echoed in the chamber, speaking a language Daniel couldn't understand. The hologram adjusted, and the alien's words shifted into broken English. "To those who find this fleet," it said, its tone grave, "you hold the key to our warning. A great enemy approaches, one that cannot be stopped by strength alone. We sacrificed everything to leave this message. Take the fleet or perish as we did." Daniel's heart pounded. A warning? An enemy? What kind of threat could destroy a civilization advanced enough to build something like this? Before he could process the message, the pedestal began to hum. The ship shook slightly, and Daniel's scanner went wild. Power readings surged across the vessel, spreading to the rest of the fleet. Lights flickered to life in the corridors, and the deep rumble of engines echoed through the ship. "The fleet is waking up," Daniel muttered to himself, a mix of awe and fear gripping him. He had triggered something, a signal, a reaction. He had no idea what it meant, but he knew he couldn't stay. Racing back to the docking bay, he boarded the Venture and fired up its engines. As he pulled away from the flagship, he saw the entire fleet begin to shift, their formations aligning with precision. It was as if they were awaiting a command, ready to move at a moment's notice. Just as he thought he was safe, his ship's alarm blared again. This time, it wasn't the fleet, it was something else. A new contact appeared on his sensors, closing in fast. Whatever it wasn't human. Daniel's hands trembled as he activated his ship's defenses. He had found something incredible, something dangerous. And now, it seemed, he wasn't the only one interested. "Venture to command," he said, his voice shaking. "This is Captain Hayes. I found something, and I might need backup." The transmission cut off as the unknown vessel entered visual range. Daniel stared out at the blackness, his ship dwarfed by the looming alien presence. The discovery of the fleet had changed everything. And this was only the beginning. The activation. The Venture shook violently as the unknown ship locked onto it. Red warning lights flashed across the cockpit, and Daniel's sensors screamed in protest. The vessel approaching him was sleek, jet black, and bristling with weapons that looked far beyond human understanding. It wasn't just advanced. It was predatory. "Unidentified vessel, this is Captain Daniel Hayes of the human ship Venture. I come in peace," he said, his voice calm but his knuckles white, as he gripped the controls. No response. The alien ship's weapons glowed faintly, a charge building that sent a shiver down his spine. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to run, but his eyes darted to the fleet behind him. The ships were fully powered now, their alien designs casting a ghostly light in the dark void of space. They moved as if they were alive, shifting into a defensive formation. It was almost as though they sensed the threat. Before he could act, a burst of static crackled over his comms. A deep, guttural voice spoke in a language he couldn't understand. Then it shifted. Human. The voice snarled, distorted but clear enough to send chills through Daniel. "Why have you awoken the fleet?" Daniel blinked in surprise. "I didn't mean to. I found it by accident. I'm just an explorer." "Lies," the voice barked, cutting him off. "The fleet is a weapon of the ancients, bound by treaty to remain dormant. Your kind has broken the pact." "What pact?" Daniel demanded, his fear now mixed with frustration. "I don't even know what this fleet is." The alien ship fired a warning shot, a searing beam that passed dangerously close to the Venture. Daniel's console blared with heat warnings, and he knew his small scout ship wouldn't survive a real attack. Thinking quickly, he scanned the alien ship. Its power signature was off the charts, but there was a weak point in its shield matrix, a small window that could allow him to escape. His fingers flew over the controls as he made his move. "If you're not going to listen, then I'm leaving," he said, igniting the Venture's engines and veering sharply toward the nearest ship in the fleet. The alien vessel hesitated, clearly reluctant to fire on the ancient fleet, and Daniel used the moment to slip into the shadow of one of the larger ships. The fleet's flagship suddenly sprang to life, its weapons glowing faintly. A burst of energy erupted from it, not as an attack, but as a signal, a deep, resonating pulse that echoed across the system. Daniel's sensors struggled to keep up as the signal spread outward, passing through the alien ship and beyond. "What the hell is it doing?" Daniel muttered. The alien vessel pulled back slightly, its aggressive posture replaced by what seemed like confusion or fear. Daniel's comms crackled again. This time, the alien voice sounded more cautious. "You do not understand the danger you have unleashed, human. That signal, it will draw them." "Them? Who's them?" Daniel asked, but the line went dead. The alien ship disengaged, retreating rapidly into the blackness. Daniel stared after it, unsure whether to feel relieved or terrified. Turning his attention back to the fleet, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. The smaller ships in the fleet were aligning around the flagship, forming a protective barrier. It was almost as if they were preparing for an attack. He didn't have long to wonder why. The fleet's systems suddenly interfaced with his ship, overriding his controls. "What the?" he began, but his console lit up with streams of alien data. Symbols and coordinates flashed across the screen faster than he could process them. Then, a single word appeared in English: "Follow." Daniel hesitated. He had no idea what he was getting into, but his gut told him the fleet wasn't trying to harm him. It was guiding him. And if the signal it sent out truly was a warning, he had no time to waste. He set a course for the coordinates displayed on his screen. The fleet moved in unison, their massive engines igniting as they followed him. The sight was awe-inspiring, an entire armada moving as one, silent and imposing. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the fleet's true purpose was far more complex than he understood. Hours passed as they traveled through uncharted space. The coordinates led to a distant star system at the edge of the galaxy. When they arrived, Daniel's jaw dropped. A massive ancient station hung in the void, its size dwarfing even the flagship. It was a relic of the same civilization that built the fleet, its architecture radiating an otherworldly elegance. The fleet docked with the station, and Daniel followed suit. As he stepped onto the station's platform, his scanner picked up faint signs of activity. Lights flickered on, and the air seemed to hum with anticipation. This place had been waiting for him, or perhaps for anyone brave enough to awaken the fleet. In the center of the station, a massive holographic map activated, displaying the galaxy in stunning detail. Red zones spread across it like a disease, converging on the coordinates where Daniel now stood. A soft, mechanical voice echoed through the chamber. "Threat imminent. Prepare the fleet." Daniel's heart sank. Whatever this threat was, it was coming for them. And now, he was part of it. First contact. The holographic map shimmered, its red zones pulsing like an infected wound spreading across the galaxy. Captain Daniel Hayes stared at the ominous display, his mind racing. The phrase, "threat imminent. Prepare the fleet," echoed in his ears. What was this threat? Why was the fleet suddenly waking after what seemed like centuries of dormancy? Before he could process it further, his ship's alarm blared once again, jolting him out of his thoughts. His scanner detected a new presence, a vessel far larger than the one he had encountered earlier. It wasn't just approaching, it was already here. The chamber trembled as the alien ship descended into view through the station's massive observation window. This one was unlike the previous Predator-like craft. It was a behemoth, covered in gleaming black armor with pulsating green veins running along its surface. It radiated an aura of dominance and power. The fleet outside adjusted its formation, aligning its ships defensively around the station, like soldiers bracing for an attack. A sudden chime echoed through the station, and a deep, resonant voice filled the chamber. "Human," it said, low and deliberate, as if tasting the word. "You have awoken the relic fleet. Do you comprehend the gravity of your actions?" Daniel froze, instinctively gripping his sidearm, though he knew it was useless against whatever was speaking. The voice didn't seem to come from a physical being. Instead, it resonated through the very walls of the station, as if the ship outside were speaking directly to him. "I didn't mean to wake them," Daniel shouted, trying to sound braver than he felt. "I found the fleet by accident. I'm just an explorer." The voice hummed in disapproval. "An accident. Do not lie to us, human. The fleet was bound by the Treaty of Exile, sealed by blood and starfire. Its activation is no mere coincidence." Daniel's mind reeled. Treaty of Exile, blood and starfire. None of it made sense, yet it felt heavy with importance. He decided to push back, hoping to buy time. "I don't know anything about a treaty. I found the fleet in a derelict state, drifting in the void. If you want someone to blame, you're looking at the wrong guy." The voice paused, as if considering his words. Then, with a sudden flash of green light, a new hologram materialized in the chamber. It depicted a figure, a towering alien with elongated limbs and a regal bearing, its glowing green eyes fixed on Daniel. Its appearance was unlike anything in human records, a fusion of organic elegance and mechanical precision. "Who are you?" Daniel demanded, his voice trembling slightly. "I am Herok," the figure replied, "speaker of the Meridian sovereignty. We were the wardens of the relic fleet, charged with ensuring its eternal slumber. Your kind has violated the sanctity of this galaxy by awakening it." "Wait," Daniel said, piecing things together. "If you're the wardens, why are you here now? How did you know the fleet was activated?" "The fleet sent out a signal," Herok said, his voice heavy with accusation. "A beacon to all who remember the Scourge. Do you not understand what you have summoned, human?" "The Scourge," Daniel repeated, the word sending a chill through him. He had heard no mention of this before. Herok's eyes burned brighter, and his tone darkened. "The Scourge is a force of destruction, consuming everything in its path. It adapts, it learns, and it never stops. Your ancestors were part of the last alliance to stand against it. They failed, leaving only this fleet behind as a desperate safeguard." Daniel's pulse quickened. He wasn't just dealing with an alien fleet. He had stumbled into the remnants of an ancient war. But something didn't add up. If the fleet is meant to stop the Scourge, why keep it dormant? Why bury it in the middle of nowhere? Herok hesitated, as if reluctant to answer. "Because the fleet is both salvation and doom. Its activation draws the Scourge like moths to flame. We buried it to delay the inevitable, to give the galaxy time to rebuild. And now you, in your ignorance, have undone centuries of careful planning." Daniel's frustration boiled over. "You're blaming me for something I didn't know existed. Instead of lecturing me, how about helping me fix this?" Herok's expression softened, though only slightly. "Fix it? There is no fixing what has been unleashed. There is only preparation. The Scourge will come, and they will leave nothing but silence in their wake." Outside, the fleet began to stir again. Ships shifted into a tighter formation, their weapons powering up. The station's lights dimmed, casting eerie shadows across the chamber. Herok's hologram flickered as a new, sharper alarm blared through the station. Daniel's scanner confirmed his worst fear. Multiple signatures were entering the system. Large, fast-moving objects with no identifiable origin. His heart raced as the realization hit him. "They're here," Herok said, his voice grim. "The Scourge has found us." Daniel stared at the hologram, then out the observation window. Far in the distance, dark, twisted shapes began to emerge from hyperspace, their forms writhing like living nightmares. They were unlike anything he had ever seen, organic yet mechanical, their surfaces shifting and pulsing as if alive. "What do we do?" Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Herok's gaze bore into him. "You awakened the fleet, human. Now you must command it." Daniel's mouth went dry. "Command it? I don't even know how to." "There is no time for doubt," Herok thundered. "The fleet responds to its awakener. It will obey you. If you falter, we are all doomed." The twisted shapes of the Scourge ships closed in, their numbers growing with each passing second. Daniel swallowed hard and turned to the glowing console before him. He didn't know what he was doing, but he knew one thing. Humanity's survival, and perhaps the galaxy's, now rested in his hands. The forgotten allies. Daniel's hands hovered over the console, his heart pounding as he stared at the swirling interface of alien symbols and lights. The fleet's presence loomed outside the observation window, glowing faintly against the void, waiting for his command. The Scourge ships were closing in, their grotesque, shifting forms blotting out the distant starlight. "Command the fleet? Are you kidding me?" Daniel muttered under his breath. His voice trembled, but his resolve hardened. Whatever this was, he was in it now, and failure wasn't an option. The console seemed to respond to his hesitation. Lights shifted and aligned, forming a simplified layout that even his human brain could interpret. It was as if the fleet was adjusting itself to him, recognizing his inexperience. "You have little time to adapt," Human. Harok's voice cut through the tension, his hologram flickering in the chamber. The scourge is relentless. They will tear through this system and leave nothing behind. What do you expect me to do? I'm a scout pilot, not a general. Daniel snapped. Your ancestors fought beside us. Harok replied sharply. It is in your blood. Command them, or perish. Daniel took a deep breath and focused. He pressed a glowing symbol on the console, and the entire fleet responded instantly. Ships realigned, their weapons powering up in perfect synchronization. A wave of energy pulsed outward, causing the approaching scourge ships to falter briefly. What just happened? Daniel asked, glancing at the hologram. Harok's gaze darkened. The fleet is testing its readiness. But do not mistake this for a victory. The scourge will adapt. They always do. The scourge ships swarmed closer, their movements chaotic yet eerily coordinated. One ship broke formation, diving toward the fleet with terrifying speed. Its surface writhed, splitting open to reveal a pulsating core that glowed with unnatural energy. Activate defensive grid. Harok barked. Daniel's fingers raced over the console, guided more by instinct than knowledge. The fleet's smaller ships surged forward, forming a protective barrier around the flagship and the station. Beams of light erupted from their weapons, striking the incoming scourge vessel. The creature ship twisted and screamed, a sound that somehow pierced the vacuum of space, before shattering into shards of blackened metal. The momentary victory was short-lived. The remaining scourge ships adapted, shifting their forms to deflect the fleet's attacks. Daniel watched in horror as the alien weapons seemed to learn, bending physics itself to counter the fleet's firepower. They're too fast, Daniel muttered. We can't hit them all. Harok stepped closer to the console, his hologram imposing. There is another way. What way? The relic fleet was not just built to fight. It was built to awaken an ancient weapon. A weapon created by the First Alliance, a coalition that included your kind. It lies dormant, hidden in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. The coordinates were encoded in the fleet's central core. You're saying there's some ultimate weapon out there? Daniel asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. Harok nodded. A weapon designed to target the scourge's very essence, but it requires activation and time. You must guide the fleet to its location while defending against the scourge. Daniel's scanner beeped again, drawing his attention. More scourge ships were arriving, their numbers multiplying with terrifying speed. If we stay here, we're done for, Daniel said. He turned back to the console. How do I access those coordinates? The console responded as if reading his mind. A new set of symbols appeared, highlighting a distant star system on the holographic map. The route was dangerous, cutting through a nebula known for its treacherous gravitational anomalies. Of course it's not easy, Daniel muttered. He locked in the coordinates and spoke into the comms, hoping the fleet would somehow understand him. This is Captain Hayes. All ships, prepare for warp. We're moving out. The fleet obeyed instantly, their engines roaring to life. The station's defenses activated, buying precious seconds as the fleet began its jump. Daniel felt the familiar jolt of hyperspace travel as the Venture joined the formation, the stars stretching into streaks of light. For a brief moment, there was silence. Explain this alliance, Daniel demanded, breaking the tense quiet. You keep talking about my ancestors. What does humanity have to do with all this? Harok's hologram dimmed slightly, his expression unreadable. Centuries ago, the scourge threatened the galaxy. They were unlike anything we had ever faced. No technology, no species could resist them for long. But then, humanity appeared. Primitive, yes, but resourceful. Adaptive. Your kind's creativity and unpredictability gave the First Alliance a fighting chance. And we failed, Daniel said, piecing it together. Harok nodded solemnly. The scourge was pushed back, but not destroyed. The fleet was created as a failsafe, hidden away with the hope that it would never be needed again. Your ancestors chose to forget, to let time erase the scars of that war. But now, the scourge returns. Daniel felt a strange mix of pride and guilt. Humanity had played a vital role in the galaxy's past, yet they had abandoned their responsibility. Now it fell to him, a lone scout pilot, to fix what had been left undone. The ship's alarms snapped him back to reality. The fleet was nearing the nebula, its swirling clouds of gas and gravitational eddies creating a dangerous obstacle course. Worse, the scourge wasn't far behind, their twisted ships tearing through hyperspace like predators hunting their prey. "Hold formation," Daniel ordered, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions within him. "We're not losing anyone." The nebula loomed ahead, and with it, the next chapter in humanity's fight for survival. A galactic warning. The fleet plunged into the nebula, its swirling gases glowing with eerie hues of blue and green. Gravitational anomalies tugged at the ships, warping space like invisible fingers reaching out to pull them apart. Daniel gritted his teeth as the Venture's systems struggled to compensate. Outside, the fleet moved in perfect synchronization, their advanced designs adapting to the chaotic environment. But the scourge was relentless. Their twisted ships entered the nebula in pursuit, their forms shimmering and shifting as if they were alive. They didn't just follow. They thrived in the chaos, weaving through gravitational eddies with unsettling precision. "Status report," Daniel barked, forgetting for a moment that he was the only human aboard. The console responded, displaying an ever-growing list of scourge ships closing in. The fleet was holding its formation, but the strain was visible. Smaller ships faltered under the nebula's pressure, their shields flickering as the scourge pressed harder. "This isn't going to hold," Daniel muttered, his mind racing. "We need an edge." The hologram of Haruk flickered to life beside him. The fleet's databanks contain advanced countermeasures, but they require synchronization with your vessel's systems. Will your human technology survive the process? Daniel scoffed. "Guess we're about to find out." The holographic interface lit up with alien symbols. Daniel's console buzzed violently as his ship's systems struggled to integrate with the fleet's network. Lights flickered, and for a moment, he thought the Venture might overload. But then, the chaos stabilized. His scanner lit up with new targeting data, and his ship's weapon systems hummed with unfamiliar energy. "You have access to the fleet's quantum disruption array," Haruk explained. "It will destabilize the scourge's molecular structure, but its range is limited. You must act decisively." Daniel nodded, gripping the controls. "Let's see what this thing can do." He targeted the lead scourge ship, its grotesque form slithering through the nebula. With a deep breath, he activated the array. A pulse of energy rippled out, striking the scourge vessel. The effect was immediate. The ship convulsed, its surface splitting apart like shattered glass, before disintegrating into a cloud of black dust. The fleet roared to life, following Daniel's lead. Coordinated pulses of energy lashed out, tearing through the scourge ranks. The nebula lit up with explosions as one by one, the enemy ships fell. For the first time, it felt like they had the upper hand. But the scourge wasn't finished. A massive hulking shape emerged from the nebula's depths, a scourge dreadnought. It dwarfed even the largest ships in the relic fleet, its surface pulsating with an ominous red glow. The sight was enough to sap the brief surge of hope from Daniel's chest. "What the hell is that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Scourge's command vessel," Haruk said grimly. "It leads their swarm. If it falls, the rest will scatter. But its defenses are formidable." Daniel clenched his fists. "Then we take it out." Haruk's hologram darkened. "You don't understand. This is not a simple battle. The dreadnought's core is fused with a fragment of the Scourge's essence. Destroying it risks catastrophic consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Haruk hesitated. "It could trigger a chain reaction, collapsing the nebula, and us with it." Daniel stared at the monstrous ship on his scanner, its presence dominating the display. The scourge ships rallied around it, their chaotic movements suddenly more organized. The fleet's firepower was strong, but against something like this, it felt like bringing a knife to a gunfight. Then a voice crackled over his comms, a voice that wasn't Heroc's. "This is Captain Vrina of the Dravak Coalition. We are entering the nebula to assist the human." Daniel blinked in shock. "Who?" Another ship burst into view, its sleek design unlike anything in the fleet. It was followed by several others, all bearing the same distinct markings. Alien voices flooded the comms as more ships joined the fight, their weapons targeting the scourge. Heroc's hologram tilted its head. The Dravak. Unexpected. They were once allies of the First Alliance, but they abandoned us long ago. "I guess they decided to come back," Daniel said, a flicker of hope reigniting. The Dravak ships tore into the scourge, their precision and firepower turning the tide. The relic fleet and its new allies worked in unison, carving a path toward the dreadnought. "Human," Captain Vrina's voice called over the comms, her tone sharp and commanding. "We have analyzed the dreadnought structure. Its core is vulnerable, but only a direct strike will destroy it." "Let me guess," Daniel replied. "It's a suicide mission." "Not if you're fast," she said. "The relic fleet's flagship carries the necessary payload. Guide it in, and we'll cover you." Daniel took a deep breath, his fingers tightening around the controls. "Heroc, can the flagship take the hit?" The hologram's expression was unreadable. "It was built for this, but its loss will diminish the fleet's strength." "It's a risk we'll have to take," Daniel said. He relayed the plan to the fleet, watching as the flagship shifted its position. The Scourge dreadnought began to react, its pulsating surface charging for a devastating attack. Daniel pushed the Venture to its limits, weaving through the chaos to guide the flagship into position. The Dravak ships and the rest of the fleet provided covering fire, holding the Scourge at bay. As the flagship reached the dreadnought, Daniel triggered the payload. A brilliant explosion erupted, consuming both ships in a blinding light. The shockwave rippled through the nebula, scattering the Scourge ships like leaves in a storm. Silence followed. The remaining Scourge fled, their coordination shattered. The nebula's gases calmed, leaving the battered fleet and its allies floating in the aftermath. Daniel exhaled deeply, his hands trembling. "Is it over?" "For now," Heroc said. "But the Scourge will return, and this galaxy must be ready." Captain Vrina's voice cut in. "Human, your actions have bought us time. The Dravak will spread the warning. The galaxy owes you a debt." Daniel stared out at the stars, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a new war. And humanity, whether it liked it or not, was at its center once again. The gathering storm. The victory in the nebula was short-lived. As the fleet regrouped, Daniel Hayes sat in the cockpit of the Venture, staring at the swirling remains of the destroyed Scourge dreadnought. Despite their success, an uneasy silence filled the void. The Scourge had been pushed back, but the whispers of Heroc's warning lingered in his mind. They will return. Heroc's hologram reappeared, his expression severe. The Scourge will not forgive this setback. They will adapt, regroup, and strike with greater force. This was merely a scout wave. A scout wave. Daniel repeated, his voice tinged with disbelief. That thing we just fought was the warm-up. Heroc nodded grimly. The Scourge operates in cycles. This was a test. Their full force will make the galaxy tremble. You must prepare humanity. And the galaxy for what is to come. Daniel leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. Right. Let me just call up every alien leader and convince them to join forces against a nightmare they probably don't even believe in. You will not be alone, Heroc said. The Dravak have already pledged their support. Others will follow if the message is delivered. Suddenly, a transmission crackled to life. Captain Vrina of the Dravak Coalition appeared on the screen, her sharp, angular features framed by the faint glow of her ship's interface. "Human," she said without preamble, "we are sending the fleet's warning signal across known space. It contains everything we have on the Scourge. Their patterns, their weaknesses, and the scale of the threat." "And what happens when they ignore it?" Daniel asked, skepticism heavy in his voice. Vrenna's eyes narrowed. "Then we make them listen." The fleet's flagship, though battered, took the lead as the combined forces moved toward the next set of coordinates. These coordinates, Haruk explained, pointed to an ancient communications array hidden in a desolate system, a relic from the First Alliance capable of broadcasting a message across the entire galaxy. As the fleet entered the system, the array came into view, a colossal structure suspended between two dying stars. Its immense spires reached out like skeletal hands, pulsating faintly with energy. The place looked ancient, forgotten, and haunted. "The Nexus Array," Haruk said, reverence in his voice. "It was the heart of the First Alliance's communication network. With it, you can warn every sentient species at once." Daniel stared at the structure on his screen. If this thing is so powerful, why hasn't anyone used it since the First Alliance fell? "Because it requires a key," Haruk said. "A key that only those who awaken the relic fleet can wield." Daniel's stomach sank. "Of course it does." Haruk extended a hand, his hologram glowing brighter. "You are the key, Captain Hayes. Place your hand on the console and let the fleet's systems synchronize with the Nexus." Daniel hesitated. Every instinct screamed that this was bigger than him, that he wasn't the right person for this. But the faces of the people he'd left behind on Earth filled his mind. He couldn't fail them. Steeling himself, he placed his hand on the console. A surge of energy coursed through him, and the Nexus Array roared to life. The stars seemed to pulse in rhythm with the array as a massive wave of data spread outward, racing across the galaxy faster than light. "Transmission sent," Haruk confirmed. "The warning is now in the hands of those who hear it." Daniel exhaled, his hand shaking. "Now what? Do we just wait for them to show up?" "Not all will heed the warning," Vrenna said, her voice laced with bitterness. "Some will deny the danger. Others will see this as an opportunity to exploit the chaos. But there are those who will answer the call." As if to prove her point, new signals began appearing on Daniel's scanner. Ships were arriving. First a trickle, then a steady stream. They came from all corners of the galaxy, massive carriers, sleek fighters, and ships of designs Daniel couldn't even comprehend. But not all arrivals were friendly. One of the ships, a jagged monstrosity that looked more like a weapon than a vessel, hailed the fleet. The face on the screen was reptilian, with sharp predatory eyes. "I am General Karthus of the Vroth Dominion," the alien growled. "You dare awaken the relic fleet and summon us here. Explain yourself, human, before we destroy you." Daniel bristled, but kept his voice steady. "We're not here to fight you. The Scourge is coming. And if we don't unite, we're all dead." Karthus sneered. "The Scourge is a myth, a tale to frighten weaklings. The Vroth need no allies." Before Daniel could respond, Vrenna cut in. "Then leave. But when the Scourge comes for your worlds, do not expect us to save you." Karthus growled but terminated the transmission. His ship lingered for a moment before vanishing into hyperspace. Daniel shook his head. "That went well." "Not all will see reason," Haruk said. "But the seeds have been planted. When the Scourge arrives, even the skeptics will understand. By then, it may be too late." As more ships arrived, a strange mix of hope and dread filled the fleet. The galaxy was waking, but whether it was ready to face the Scourge remained uncertain. Daniel stared out at the gathering armada. This was no longer just about survival. It was about forging a new alliance, one that could stand against the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were already out of time. The final stand. The galaxy's largest gathering of ships now orbited the Nexus Array, an armada of vessels representing hundreds of species, cultures, and alliances, some centuries-old enemies now forced to fight together. Despite their numbers, the tension in the air was suffocating. The warning had been sent, and the Scourge's arrival was inevitable. Every captain, soldier, and crew member knew what was at stake: survival or extinction. Captain Daniel Hayes stood on the Venture's bridge, staring at the massive holographic map before him. It displayed the Nexus Array and the surrounding systems, overlaid with projections of incoming Scourge forces. Their arrival wasn't a question of if, it was when. And it was going to be soon. "Status report," Daniel called out, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. Haruk's hologram flickered to life beside him. "The fleet is at full operational capacity. Defensive positions are established around the Nexus. Reinforcements from the Eastern Quadrant are still en route, but the Scourge will likely arrive first." "Typical," Daniel muttered. He glanced at Captain Vrena, whose ship was docked alongside his. "Any word from the skeptics? The ones who think the Scourge is a fairy tale?" Vrena's hologram appeared on the opposite side of the console. "The Vroth Dominion and several others refuse to engage unless the Scourge enters their space directly. They'll sit back and watch us bleed." Daniel clenched his fists. "We don't have time for politics." "You misunderstand, human," Vrena said coldly. "It's not politics, it's survival of the fittest. They believe the Scourge will weaken us, and they'll pick the pieces clean afterward." Before Daniel could respond, the alarm blared across the fleet. His scanner lit up with new contacts. Thousands of them. A massive red wave appeared on the map, growing larger with each second. "They're here," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. The Scourge poured into the system like a flood. Their ships were grotesque amalgamations of organic and mechanical forms, shifting and pulsating as if alive. They moved with terrifying speed and precision, a swarm of predators converging on the Nexus Array. "Fleet Command," Daniel said into the comms, his voice firm. "This is Captain Hayes. All ships, hold your positions. Do not engage until the Scourge reaches the outer perimeter. We fight together, or we die alone." The fleet responded with a chorus of acknowledgments. Ships of every size and shape formed defensive lines around the Nexus. Fighters launched from carriers, their engines roaring as they took formation. Massive cruisers powered up their main weapons, their barrels glowing with lethal energy. The first wave of Scourge ships slammed into the outer defenses. Beams of light and bursts of plasma lit up the void, tearing through the invaders. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the fleet's firepower might be enough. The Scourge ships were falling in droves, their twisted forms disintegrating under the assault. But then they adapted. The Scourge ships shifted their shapes, their surfaces hardening against the fleet's weapons. They began to push through the defenses, overwhelming smaller ships with sheer numbers. Explosions rocked the fleet as several frigates were destroyed in rapid succession. "Haruk, we need options," Daniel shouted as the battle intensified. "The Nexus Array's energy reserves contain a weapon," Haruk said. "A system-wide pulse designed to disable the Scourge's adaptive capabilities. But it will leave the fleet's ships vulnerable for several minutes." Daniel's mind raced. "If we use it, can the fleet hold out until our systems come back online?" Haruk hesitated. "If the Scourge numbers continue to grow, unlikely." "Damn it," Daniel muttered. "What about the relic fleet's core? Can it be used to boost the array's power?" "The core is designed for such a purpose," Haruk said, "but it will destroy the fleet in the process." Daniel froze. The relic fleet was their strongest weapon, a gift from an ancient alliance that had already sacrificed everything to leave it behind. To destroy it now would be a loss the galaxy might never recover from. "Human," Vrena's voice broke through his thoughts. "If we fall here, the fleet's existence won't matter. The Scourge will consume us all. Make the call." Daniel stared at the holographic map, the red wave of Scourge ships pushing closer to the Nexus. He knew there was only one choice. "Haruk, "Initiate the core transfer," he said, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of the decision. "Understood," Herok replied. "The relic fleet will hold the line until the array is ready." The relic fleet surged forward, its ships glowing brighter as their core energy built to critical levels. They struck the scourge with renewed ferocity, their weapons carving through the swarm in a desperate final stand. Inside the Nexus, the console blazed with light as the array's power reached its peak. The stars seemed to dim as a massive pulse of energy erupted from the array, spreading across the system. The scourge ships convulsed and froze, their adaptive abilities nullified. "Now," Daniel shouted, "all ships, hit them with everything you've got." The fleet unleashed a coordinated assault, obliterating the scourge ships in a storm of fire and light. One by one, the invaders fell, their once unstoppable swarm reduced to ashes. As the battle ended, silence returned to the void. The Nexus array dimmed, its energy reserves depleted. The relic fleet was gone, its sacrifice complete. Daniel sat back in his chair, exhausted but alive. "Status report. Survivors are regrouping," Herok said. "The scourge has been defeated. For now." "For now," Daniel repeated, his voice hollow. He knew this wasn't the end. The scourge would return, stronger and more relentless than ever. But the galaxy had something it hadn't had in centuries: hope. As the fleet drifted in the aftermath, new transmissions began to pour in from across the galaxy. Species that had once ignored the warning now pledged their support. The sacrifice of the relic fleet had united them in a way nothing else could. Daniel gazed out at the stars, knowing the fight was far from over. Humanity had reclaimed its place in the galaxy, not as conquerors, but as defenders of a fragile peace. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of pride and determination. The scourge would return, but so would they.